Good morning and welcome to this week's Jump recruitment discussion. And this week we're going to talk about recruitment leadership strategies to drive client and candidate success in 2025. But first, over the last couple of weeks, we've quietly mentioned that we'll be producing podcasts as well as webinars. And last week we put out some polls on LinkedIn and we finally finalized the name. So I'm pleased to tell you that our first podcast will be released on the 5th of March. And the name that you have chosen is Recruitment Leaders Unlocked. The first series will be all about growth, where each coach or coach and mentor from Jump will be interviewing recruitment leaders from businesses of different sizes. So we're looking at 1 to 5 heads, 6 to 25 heads, 26 to 50 heads, and 50 heads plus. So you'll get a real good view of what the marketplace is looking like and the differences and the similarities between running a micro business and running a multi-office, nationwide, multi-nation business. So we're generally excited about this and about our new products, and it will all be available on the usual podcast outlets and probably some others, including our website. And obviously, if you haven't already signed up to our YouTube channel, feel free to sign up to our YouTube channel. So let's kick off today. Today, I'm joined by Martin and Paul. So let's talk about this. Leadership strategies to drive client and candidate success in 2025. First question, what's the biggest inefficiencies in most recruitment processes today, and how can leaders fix them to scale in 2025?
Who's kicking this one off, Martin?
You kick it off, Paul.
Thank you so much. Okay. Well, I mean, I'm going to talk about the fact that, and I know we talk about this a lot, but fun enough, I had the conversation this morning. One of the things that I think recruitment businesses often undervalue is the data that they have sitting on their CRM. So candidate data, candidate CVs, profiles, and so forth. And I think one of the most underutilized, or if I could perhaps say, poorly managed elements of recruitment businesses is our ability to code candidates correctly and then engage with them on a long-term basis. You know, I think every recruitment company presently will say one of the big issues that they have, one of the big challenges is finding sufficient numbers of good quality candidates to present to clients in a market that is still not yet back to where we would like it to be. And we know that people are presently feeling anxious about changing jobs. That's a mode that's been in place for a while, and yet we're sitting on, in some cases, tens of thousands of candidates that we've spent money attracting, but we don't connect with. So for me, one of the biggest inefficiencies when you talk recruitment processes, if not the biggest inefficiency, is our ability to code people correctly and engage with them directly. And the way, of course, and we keep talking about this, is now to be investing in software and technology that will help you to do that. And the truth is that cost is coming down all of the time. It's a bit like owning a shop and not having a clue about the stock you've got in your stock room, what you have, how much of it you have, when you last looked at it, whether it's still fashionable or it's old-fashioned. I could go on with the analogies. The fact is, we do an awful lot to keep our stock room stocked to the hilt, but we don't do anything about managing the stock properly.
Yeah, and that was my first point as well, Paul. I think it's that use of data, and also not just the candidates themselves, but we're not just experts in finding talent, we're experts in the recruitment process. So if we data entry at the point of an activity, we will gain knowledge across multiple customers on time to hire, on delays in recruitment process, and we can use that to play back to customers to control the process more effectively. But the point's the same, it comes back to data entry. And then I'd also say that it's not just front office processes and systems, but back office as well. So when you look to buy technology, don't necessarily go with the shiniest toy that has the greatest functionality. Look for one that integrates into your own tech stack currently, because where I see the biggest inefficiencies and errors is when you have systems that don't integrate and you have human interaction to manage the handoffs, and that can delay cash flow and that can really cripple a business as they're trying to scale going forward. So be sensible when you're acquiring tech that it actually builds into your end-to-end system flow as well.
So I think I'm going to sort of push on that and sort of push on little Paul's point there, that it's that reactive versus proactive. We are so reactive in recruitment. Client calls in, yes, I'll go and find a candidate. Client calls in, yes, I'll do that. Candidate calls in, yes, I'll go find them a job. When actually we should be thinking about building talent pools that match our client needs, and therefore we can start to orchestrate what our clients are looking at. And if we start to build talent pools, it will also expedite the recruitment process and develop the recruitment process. Because as Paul said, if we don't know haven't any stock in our shop, then it's a very poor shop and people don't come in. But recruitment agencies have clients coming to them all the time asking for people, and all the time we say, let me go away and find somebody, rather than, right, these are the talent pools that I've got already in your marketplace. This is what I've already started to build for you. And I think that's a big sort of differentiation, that if you can be proactive and take your talent pool to market, then it's a real true differentiator in the marketplace. And I said, if you talk about, we've talked about this a lot over the last couple of weeks about what clients want. Clients won't buy your service until you provide really good candidates. But we're too intent on trying to sell a service to them. And I think that's where the inefficiencies. We're selling services to our clients that our clients don't know whether you're good, bad, or indifferent, because the level of that service is measured by the quality of the candidate you send. But it's also measured by the speed that you send that candidate. So if you've got those candidates pre-developed, because you're developing systems that look, if my client looks like that, then my candidate should look like that. But my candidate database should be full of those type of candidates, rather than me having to go out and find those candidates. Then that falls into Paul's point of, if you're not coding your candidates, you're not putting availability dates on, especially for temps and contractors, etc., then what do you expect? I was with a client 2 or 3 weeks ago now, and we went through their placements. They were very proud to list where they had all those placements from. Very, very, very few had come from their CRM. And they were spending a fortune on Indeed and on all the job boards, etc., etc. And I'm going, right, let's now see how many of those candidates were on our CRM already. And there was a very, very large amount already on their CRM. So we've got to start to think we've got to become more proactive as a business rather than reactive, and have, as Paul describes and I've described as a long time, have a shop full of things that clients can buy, rather than having empty shelves that you've then got to go out and fill. So second question then. With clients' expectations evolving, what do you see as the biggest disconnect between what agencies offer and what clients actually want?
And I think this is something, again, we've touched on many times. The days of being as we used to call them, body shops, agencies were called body shops. If that's all we do is simply offer people, or, as you said correctly, Howard, you've got a vacancy, great, I'll go away and find people for you. If that is the sort of level of service we're offering, then we are bang out of step with what's occurring now in the market. The truth of the matter is that conduits for employers to find staff are multiple. They weren't in the old days. Not that many years ago. You used a recruitment agency to find you staff, no matter what the sector. Or I guess you could have placed an advert in a newspaper, but maybe even more recently, obviously, job boards and social media. But now I think with the advent of AI and all the technology coming in, it's getting a whole lot easier for employers to find candidates and vice versa without the middleman or woman being us. You've got to offer multifaceted support to clients. It's got to be, and Martin was talking about this, data. They need support. They need consultative services. We also need to be advising them about trends, things that are occurring in their markets, in their sectors, around skills and in terms of actual attitude. So, for example, I was talking today to a client about the fact that 38 to nearly 40% of the American workforce now is freelance. Freelance is a broad statement. It means temps, it means contractors, it means limited businesses, but these are people by definition that don't have permanent jobs. And the trend is onwards and upwards. It's been growing and growing and growing. And I think we know that is something happening over here too. Very gradually, there is a move towards a portable work style, if you want to use that phrase. Now, we need to be giving our clients this information, and we need to be guiding them, counseling them, providing them with the tools to help them plan their business growth, and their workforce management. Just talking about, I'll react very quickly when you have a vacancy, is no longer going to cut it. We have to be tighter to clients, offering them those kind of services, as well as other things, and we've talked about it, HR services and other things that you could relate to that whole manpower piece. So for me, the biggest disconnect, the one that I think is getting broader and wider, is that agencies that only offer candidates and are not thinking much more broadly about how they assist their clients to develop their businesses, how they cure their problems, the things that keep them awake, are going to find life getting more and more difficult as the months and the years progress.
That's a great point. Well, I'm going to do what I know Howard absolutely loves we do, which is to challenge the concept of the question itself.
He writes the question, so it's
I'm not sure that clients' expectations have evolved massively. I think when you're looking at MSP and RPO levels, I think technology does drive change, and they're looking for cost to be driven out of the process. They're looking for time to be driven out of the process.
Yep.
I will concentrate more on niche contingent recruitment, where you are working in a specific skills area where the demand for candidates is high. And in that instance, I'd say that the client expectation is, I want high quality candidate at a good value within a good time frame. I don't think that's changed in the last 10 years. I think that is still true. How you get to that point using the tools at your disposal, I agree, has changed. I think the biggest disconnect between client expectation and what agencies offer is we don't use the power of our knowledge and the power of the data that we have to help mold client expectations early enough. So they will come to an agency or a PSL if they're using one and say, go and find me a unicorn. And then they'll shout at the agencies because the quality of the candidates aren't good enough. We're not using our data and our knowledge to turn around to that candidate in advance to educate them that what they're looking for might not be available in the market at the budget that they have. Or they might need to look at someone with 80% of the skills and train them. So the disconnect is there, but it's within our power using the data that we have to shape the client's expectations and close that gap.
An interesting challenge. So I'm going to push on this, and I'm going to say that the lack of, or the big disconnect is, if you start to look at how we promote our recruitment agencies and what clients' expectations are, the big disconnect is we're not talking about what the clients are talking about, we're talking about recruitment. And whenever you go into a client, they're not talking about recruitment. They're talking about their marketplace. They're talking about the pressures on their marketplace. They're talking about what the government's doing on their marketplace. When you go talk to a recruitment agency, they talk about the pressures on their recruitment agency. You go talk to their end clients, they talk about the pressures on their end clients. But we're forever posting on LinkedIn, job, which we should be, okay? But that switches quite a lot of the marketplace off. Then we post how to find a CV, how to write a CV, how to pass an interview. Here are 5 interview questions you should do, etc., etc. What we're not actually talking about is what our clients are talking about. And so if you want to start to embed yourself into your client, the client's expectations is they want really good candidates. So we should be starting to talk about their marketplace on the social media profiles, because then candidate and client start to see we're talking the same language as them, we're talking about the same methodologies as them, we're talking about what they're talking about. Would that not make them feel more comfortable to come and talk to you? Would that make them feel more comfortable to have a conversation because they feel that you understand their market? You're just not a recruiter looking for a fee. And I think there's a big disconnect there, that we are pushing further and further, and we're getting further and further away from our client market because we're more talking about us and what we do, etc. And you can look at that, and I've tracked quite a lot of my clients. They do all of this type of things, etc. And I've tried to change those type of things. But then when you look at the people who are liking and connecting on their posts, guess what? They're all recruiters. So we're just, sycophantically liking our own business rather than actually getting our clients to like our business, because we want more and more likes. No, I'd rather have less likes, but from clients that we can actually do business with. And I think that's a huge disconnect. So, what habits or daily actions separate consistently high billing recruiters from those who struggle to scale their success?
Now, I could literally talk about this for about a week. I'm
Sit
not
down,
going to. You'll
Martin.
be delighted to hear.
Plug in, everybody.
I'm really genuinely. This is about discipline. This is about being disciplined. This is about having a daily plan. It's about doing the right things every day. And I find this intensely, and I've always found this intensely frustrating. The difference between the high billers and the people that are average or don't make the grade comes down to doing the right things consistently every day. And you need to have an understanding of what those right things are. And it's very hard to get beyond this question without talking about metrics and KPIs, how many calls you're going to make, how many CVs you're going to send, how many interviews you're striving to arrange in a week, how many jobs you're seeking to take, how many client meetings you're trying to arrange and attend, all the old basics. That we could talk forever about much more sophisticated sales techniques and business development techniques, but if the basics aren't in place, you're not going to get very far. I don't think there's any accident around the high billers. They use their time well. And we'll go back to the first point, they document everything very carefully. It's not an accident that they talk to certain candidates regularly. Those things are documented. It's not in their heads, not on a post-it note stuck to their screen. It's stuff that's on the CRM, stuff in their Outlook. And they are rigid about calling people at certain points in the week and in the month, and rigid about what they're calling about, rigid about client meetings and the consistency and regularity of those meetings. And there are certain things they do every single day. And not surprisingly, because they do those things every day, they become pretty good at them. And I would add that this isn't just a recruitment question. If you want to learn to play the guitar, or you want to run 100 meters in a certain time period, then you have to do certain things every single day. Train, be consistent. And I don't think that the ability of those high billers is necessarily, from a talent perspective, higher than other people. That's not been my experience. It's just that they do the right things every day. And I feel, very strongly about it. As I could go on and describe an awful lot about what makes people consistently good. And I'm, without wishing to blow my own trumpet, but I suppose I will now. One of the reasons that I was a consistently high biller back in the day when I was competing against hundreds of other consultants, and I was always in that top 10%, was because I drilled my people and I drilled myself day in, day out to do certain things every single day without ever stopping. We had a rigidity to the way we worked. Wasn't awful, wasn't terrible, it was fun, and we were hugely successful. I could go on, as I say, I'll let Martin step in, but I feel, as you can tell, pretty strongly about this point.
It came across, Paul, and actually you've covered that topic really well. I think that kind of discipline that you talked about is absolutely critical. And also, I'd say the best performers I've seen focused on the input rather than the output. Correct. And they were consistent about the input, didn't get too excited on good days, didn't get too depressed on bad days.
Absolutely.
So you've not left me with many other places to go, but I'll have a look at a couple of points. So two characteristics I see in top performers. So as well as discipline, I see curiosity. So they're genuinely interested in the people they're talking to and the sector and the area that they're operating within. So they don't do it because they have to. They have a passion and they want to know more. So they will ask that follow-up question. They'll ask about a client, what happens if you don't hire this person? They'll talk to an individual and say, is your wife aware that you might be changing job? All the kind of cheeky questions that we know about, just going that layer deeper than your average consultant. And then the second one I would say is humility. So whilst we talk about having that process and that plan in place, it's also having the humility to look at yourself and go, am I doing it right? Can I get better? And I won't name him, but the best performer I used to work with, he used to have like a wooden plaque on his desk that was like a Toblerone. So the angle facing the office had written on it, I am the best. But the angle facing him said, but ... So to the world, he was, I am confident, I know what I'm doing. To himself, the question was always, can I do it better? And those two things, that curiosity and that humility, aligned with the discipline and the process that you talked about, Paul, that's what I've seen in the best performers.
I think Jerry Rice summed it up, doesn't it? I do today what others won't, so tomorrow I can do what others can't. And I think that was his comment about training, development, etc. And I think all the comments that both of you have made absolutely hit the mark spot on. And I always think that, when I look and people sort of say, can you describe the top billers that you've worked with? They've all been very, very different personalities. Some are gregarious, some are outlandishly gregarious. Some are very sort of high in the corner type people. And what I tend to find is what you've said is that they all follow a process religiously. But the one thing they do, and this is what you're alluding to, Martin, is that they get really good at that process. And then they go back to the beginning and look at the bits that they've missed and then improve that process. And they keep doing that over and over again. And I remember sort of, to use Paul's analogy, I remember going to London as a black belt martial artist, going to a school, and the guy said, "You're not a black belt in our school. You need to start at white belt." And that taught me more about what I needed to do, because I refined loads of things and he was correcting things that I'd probably got a little bit sloppy with, etc. And it's exactly the same as recruitment. How many times you meet a really good recruiter that's good, okay, but could be great, but never develop their own skills. They never develop further than just being good, because they get to that point where they just become a little bit, I suppose, blasé about their skill base and never develop further. And I think that's the bit, to be great, you've got to do today what others won't. So tomorrow you do what they can't. And I think that's the best way of doing it.
Can I just add just a quick point before we move to the next question, which is really important? And one of the reasons I always did this with my people, I had that rigidity to get that consistency, was that it's probably the only way that you'll stick in recruitment long term. Because if you hook your emotions to the constant seesaw that goes on in the business, 1 minute you're having a good moment, then a bad moment, bad days, occasional good days, it will just wear you out, spit you up, chew you up, spit you out. And I remember even as a kid at 19, 20 years old thinking, why is it I do well some days or some weeks or months, and I'm awful, I felt, in other days and weeks and months. And it was that kind of drive that I kept thinking, well, I just can't carry on with these ups and downs in emotions. 1 minute I'm feeling great about working in the business, and next I want to throw the towel in. I need to get my emotions on an even keel. And Martin pointed this out. It's the way that you don't have too many highs, too many lows. It's just consistent, and you can manage your emotions, manage your mindset, manage your mental health that way consistently. So you can have a bad day, inverted commas, because you don't make a placement, but you go home in the evening and think, well, it wasn't a bad day because I hit the mark on all the calls I needed to make and all the interviews that I needed to set up, and so on and so on. Even though I didn't get the results today, I had a positive day. And I think it's not just about the consistency in results, it's how you manage your own mindset and your own mental health.
But it's that consistency of performance, isn't it? And that's what you said about measuring your performance and being consistent. How many billers do you see that do loads of business development, get loads of jobs on, stop doing business development, do loads of candidate management, requirement management, fill the jobs, peak on their billings, and then next month do nothing, then peak on the billings, because they haven't got that consistent process. And the other thing that I find that what really great billers do is they're constantly updating their process. So they're the ones that come, have you tried this? Have you done this? Have you done that? Etc. Whether other people are going, no. And you sort of, I would hazard a guess, when you get to most really big companies, or most small companies, indeed, the big billers are the ones that probably know how to use their system really well. You're looking at AI and looking at how they can utilize AI, because it gives them more time to sell. If they can get rid of the grunt work that recruitment does, and that's what most big billers hate. They hate the grunt work. How many big billers hate paperwork? But as soon as you automate it, they love it because it works for them. So I think they're the big things. Let's move on then. So this is I'm going to be really interested to hear your answer on this, Paul. What does personal branding play in attracting top candidates, and how can a recruiter leverage it effectively?
This is super important these days, in inverted commas, to be thinking about your personal branding. And it's an interesting question, Howard, because you didn't ask about the branding of the business. you talked about personal branding. And I think that in this day and age, when you work in recruitment, you have to be a pretty good marketeer, an amateur marketeer. You know, even if you've not got the qualifications, you haven't studied marketing, you need to learn pretty fast, because you have to have a standout personality online. Now, you said earlier, Howard, and you make a great point. In my experience, not every recruiter that was hugely successful had that sort of outlandish personality. I mean, we all work with those people. You know, you knew they were in the room and they were hilarious characters. Sometimes not that hilarious, but they were characters. But I've also worked with hugely successful introverts, and I'd consider myself one of those, and sort of an extroverted introvert. So it's not about that brashness of personality, but it is very much about that focus on having a position. People know you, they can see you, you're visible. And when we talk about visibility these days, it is about being visible on social media, and that's about, we talk about it all of the time, the videos, the audio calls you make, the videos you post, you personally, the posts you put out there, the blogs, and a whole range of other factors that help you to define yourself as an expert in your particular sector. And why would you want to be an expert? Well, the biggest reason, and this may sound odd, isn't necessarily from a branding perspective, personal branding perspective, it's going to draw business to you, i.e. clients are going to phone you, although that will potentially happen. But a bigger element is that you'll become a magnet for candidates. And candidates, as we've always said, are not necessarily a singular title. I mean, candidates become clients, clients become candidates. We know that. If you've got brilliant candidates, and back to your point, Howard, about building talent pools, if you have those talent pools, you are a powerful person in your market. And so I think being visible is much more about being an attractive proposition, and you're seen as an expert to the candidates you're seeking to attract. By definition, as I said already, those people are likely to potentially be clients, or indeed you may get some clients in the process. But this personal branding is super important. And, you know, people don't, I often ask people, we were at LinkedIn, as we've talked about recently. One of the things that I gained from that meeting was the fact that it just bolstered my view that most people that use LinkedIn licenses, particularly the expensive ones, don't know how to use them properly. You know, and I always say to people, it's great buying these very expensive licenses, but please make sure that you are consistently upgrading your training, your coaching, you know what's going on. So, and it's cheap and cheerful to do that. You can tune in to any number of webinars, and the LinkedIn, I'm not pushing LinkedIn, there are other social media platforms, but there are lots of free methods of upgrading your skill sets, so that not only are you effective on social media, but you're getting yourself into a market position, a platform where people recognize you and come to speak to you. Now, again, this is one of those subjects we could do an entire webinar on, but it's not a small subject. It's not just about arranging interviews and doing those things we talked about. It is about being extremely visible these days on a personal level, not least on that premise.
I'll try and cover it quickly. I think the first point was it's your brand in attracting top candidates. Top candidates aren't necessarily active in the market. They're happy in work and they're not necessarily looking. So your personal brand warms up that population, gives credibility to you, and ultimately trust, so that when you do put a call in, the candidate is more likely to take your phone call because they're aware of your personal brand. The key thing being, your brand won't do it by itself. You still have to pick the phone up and engage that candidate, but it helps to warm it up. And then the second part was around how do you leverage it effectively? I think that's key. I think I've seen really good recruiters with brilliant personal branding, but they do nothing with it because they don't ask for anything. And I worked with a customer who actually did a really good thing and got a candidate get together. They had a function room, invited about 15, 20 candidates from the local area to come and meet them. And they bought a round of drinks and canapes and networked. The biggest thing they did extra was to ask that group of contractors, bring a colleague. And those people naturally didn't want to go on their own. So they brought a colleague with them. And they managed to meet 3 candidates that didn't even have LinkedIn profiles, that had the skill set that was perfect for what they wanted, who they would never have touched if they hadn't have asked their network to do something for them. So once you build it up, don't be afraid to ask and push that brand out in the market.
If you look at what's happening in the marketplace now, that social proofing that everyone does on everything they buy. So you start to think about attracting top talents, and you're right, Martin, they're not on the marketplace, but they're in the marketplace. So what we've got to do is attract them. So let's go back to that first question about, some of the biggest inefficiencies and some of the big problems that we're trying to solve. If you're constantly talking about recruitment and talking about how to do this, how to do that, etc., that top talent isn't interested in that. We've got to start to talk about what those top candidates want to talk about. And guess what they want to talk about? They want to talk about the same things that our clients want to talk about. So when you start to think about social media, you don't know whether you're approaching a candidate or a client at that stage. And therefore, we should need to change how we market ourselves into that. The flip side of this is that most recruiters tend to believe their own hype. And when I turn to a recruiter and say, right, how well are you known in the marketplace? I normally get, everyone knows me. I'm very well known in the marketplace, etc. And I'll challenge them and say, well, I think you're actually obscure. Because I think most recruiters are obscure in the marketplace. And we had this conversation, Paul, Martin, at LinkedIn, didn't we? And we started to talk about our client base, and we're proud to say that we're working with around 250 clients in the UK. Hang on a minute. There's 35,000 clients in the UK. So we are obscure, even as Jump, to our marketplace in the UK. So we've got to start, and we've started a program, which is why we're looking at podcasts and things like that, to elevate our obscurity. But what we're going to be doing is talking about what our clients want to talk about. And as that happens to be recruitment, that's not a bad thing for us to talk about. But from a recruitment agency looking at in their marketplace, if I'm a client or a candidate coming to look at you and all you talk about is recruitment and jobs, I'm going to switch off, because I want to know that you know what I'm going through, what I'm talking about. The other thing that clients look for on that social media and that personal branding, when they go onto your website, go into your LinkedIn profile, yes, they look at what you're saying, but what they're interested in is who you're connected to. And if you're not connected to people that they're connected to, then again, you switch them off, because they think that you are not in their marketplace. So hence you are obscure. So you've got to start to think, if you're going to build your talent pool, your personal talent pool, you've got to make sure that you're in that marketplace, talking about that marketplace. And if you believe constantly that you are obscure, you'll constantly grow that marketplace and develop a candidate pool that can actually match your client pool.
By the way, Howard, just a quick correction. You did say, and I know you didn't mean this, elevate our obscurity. I would like to think we'd want to diminish our obscurity. Just a point worth making.
Okay. I'll take that. I'll take that correction, Paul. You got what I meant, but there we go.
Yeah,
right. So let's move on then. Okay. So what cultural shifts do recruitment agencies need to make to stay competitive and grow sustainably?
I want to talk about one particular thing here. And there are obviously lots of things you need to do in terms of cultural shift. But the one thing that I think is permanent is being passionate about what you do. I think if you're working within a particular sector, then you as a business owner, as a business leader, and your people need to be passionate about what you're involved in. It can't be be seen to be just a money-making exercise. So whether you're in finance recruitment, legal recruitment, IT recruitment, you need to be passionate and knowledgeable, highly knowledgeable, expert about what it is you do. Every single person needs to live, eat, and breathe that particular subject matter. Just to give you an example, a very simple example of passion making a difference. And it wasn't about the value of the spend either. On Saturday, my wife and I were out doing what people do on a Saturday, doing a bit of shopping, and we walked into, I'll mention them, we walked into ProCook. Everyone knows ProCook, and we bought a few bits and pieces, but the guy that was serving us was so passionate about everything that we were considering purchasing and some of the things we did purchase, so knowledgeable that as we walked out, and we didn't spend much, but as we walked out, my wife said, look at the difference in that service, what we've just received to what we'd received in the previous shop. It doesn't, she said, doesn't take much, does it? And I thought, I don't know what that guy was earning, or You know, and it certainly wasn't about the value of the products that we purchased. We didn't spend an awful lot of money, but it was just his passion for what he was doing and the way he presented those particular products to us. Doesn't take a lot. And, you know, we made and it was a mental note. We even talked about it afterwards, and here it is coming up again in the webinar. If you believe in what you do and you have people that are passionate about what they do, it makes a big difference. So if we're talking about cultural shifts, make sure the people working within your business and indeed yourself are passionate about what you do and you're experts. The learning about the trends in your sector is not a chore, it's something you enjoy doing.
Yeah, I would agree. I'd also say that mindset of always be better, that kind of continuous learning, I think is crucial, and that comes from the top down. So as leaders, when you walk into the room, you know, tell people what the last thing was you learnt. You know, yesterday I saw this, it was brilliant, wasn't it? Or I read this book, and pass it around, and have that training mindset. That training isn't something that happens once a year. It is continual development and learning, and we share best practice with each other and push each other onwards as a business. And then I'd also say my experience of working within big corporates, within privately owned, reasonably sized business, and working with micro businesses, I say a consistent thing of consultants within those business is they have no idea how much it costs to run a recruitment organization. I remember when I was a consultant, and the penny dropped when I had a dinner with the CEO, and he said to me, "You do realize that less than 5 pence in every pound of revenue goes to our bottom line." And all right, it was largely a contract business, but I remember just being gobsmacked at the not the waste, but the cost of turning revenue to profit. And if you work with your team and educate them on that, it will elevate their negotiation skills. It will mean they don't settle for an average month thinking, well, I've covered my cost, because they haven't covered their cost. But if you can bring that to life to show that the investment you're making in them, and therefore the tenacity they have to take to sales and negotiation and to pushing for that extra deal, I think that's something that can change a culture in a business as well.
I think it's an interesting conversation, is it, about the cultural shift? And again, I think this is a conversation we can have for an awful long time. I was recording the podcast yesterday with a client, 250 plus staff. And one of the big points that she talked about throughout that process was the culture within her business, and how they have developed a culture, and how that culture has then manifested itself into their clients and into their candidates. And I think that's the thing, that bums on seats recruitment has almost disappeared, or hasn't disappeared, but should be disappearing. And the fact that we are a transactional recruitment agency has disappeared. And again, we go back to the big billers conversation. The difference between that big biller is that they have a really in-depth personal relationship with their clients and with their candidates. And that's a culture shift that I'm seeing a lot of recruitment agencies, when they're talking to clients, they're talking to clients because they have a connection with that client, and that client then grows, develops with them. And yeah, I talked about this, I think last week or the week before, about an agency that I'm working with in London, but we've taken from 49 clients down to 35. Out of those 35, 10 are new clients. Out of the top 3 before, 2 of those top 3 have now dropped out of the top 3, and the biggest billing client now is a brand new client. But what they're saying is that they've gone from 30% placement ratio to over 70% placement ratio, because they're not wasting time. So the cultural shift in recruitment, I think, is stop working with clients that mess you about and don't respect you. Start to find, and there are lots of clients out there that do, find the clients that absolutely respect you, and that will start to create sustainable growth. They doubled the size of their business last year, from 4 mil to 8 mil in gross profit per business. You know, so you can't knock that type of attitude and that type of cultural shift, that we spend too much time working for clients where we get paid 0 and they treat us appallingly, but we carry on doing it. So I think, to me, that's the big cultural shift that we need to make. So what can recruitment leaders help, or how can recruitment leaders help their team break bad habits and replace them with high impact revenue generating behaviors?
The first thing a leader can do, Paul, is have a cup of whatever Paul's had this morning, because he's on fire today.
I'm going to go back to something you were saying, Martin. I think It's about educating people. You made a reference to something that was said to you by your CEO at the time that had resonance. Um, I don't think it's ever about telling people do this, do that. That's not management. I think what you need to be able to do is to sit down with your people and break down what isn't working, or is, as Howard has termed it, a bad habit. Why is it a bad habit? Evidence why it's a bad habit. Why is it not working as well as it should do, or is getting worse? Explain it. Try and make them understand it, and then talk about the alternative methods, the things that will make a difference. If people want to improve and they're unhappy or dissatisfied with their performance, they should be listening. If they don't care, then you've got the wrong people in your business, quite frankly. But if they do care, they're going to listen. And I think it's true for all of us. Sometimes we are all habitual by nature. We do things over and over and over again. It's human nature. It's comfortable. We've always done it a certain way, so we carry on doing it the same way without realizing that actually it's having less and less by way of impact. And I think that what you need to do is to get people to step away from what they're doing and expose the things they're doing to them that are with evidence that it's not effective, that it may have been effective in the past, but it's less effective now, and then talk about how things can improve. And if you can do that and explain to people in a way that they understand, and they buy into the new concepts, you've got a great chance of then of changing their habits, changing their methods. If you tell them to do things without the explanations, without the education, without the coaching, the chances are it's going to fail. An awful lot of people will simply ignore you and carry on doing what they've always done.
Yeah. And I think you hinted at it there, but recognizing that actually changing bad habits is bloody hard. And there's a reason people sit in their comfort zones, is because it's comfortable. And as a leader, you have to lead from the front and demonstrate the behaviors that you want to see. I spoke to an owner of a business recently who really wanted his business to improve their data input into their CRM. And then when I asked him about his processes, he went, "Oh no, I know I'm rubbish at that. I can't." And it's, well, how do you expect your business to follow your direction if you're not doing it yourself? And there might be some people on this call who are maybe not billing their businesses of a scale where they are now in a purely leadership role, but you can still be consistent with your behaviors and your actions. And if you expect something, ask for that every day. Be really visible with the displays in the office or the questions you're asking, to show that you're not going to take your foot off the gas, that you as a leader are going to be consistent, like a metronome, asking for these behaviors to change, and there'll be repercussions if they don't. And that's not necessarily negative repercussions, as in it doesn't always have to be an axe falling. It can be the lunch clubs that you have, the people that you invite on those lunch clubs are people that demonstrate the right behaviors and processes, not necessarily just the lucky consultant who got a deal in that month. So you can change how you incentivize and talk and celebrate success through celebrating the behaviors that you want to see as a leader as well.
I absolutely agree with what both of you said. And I think that breaking a bad habit is the comment. And we all know that it takes an awful long time to break a bad habit. And therefore, your leader has to be driven to make sure that they don't let other people lapse. And it's that thing, oh, I've let them get away with it once. No, don't let them get away with it at all. If you want to create a new habit, they also need to understand what that new habit is going to bring them, and why it's going to be different, and why it's going to be better for them. And therefore, sometimes it takes a long time before that new habit starts to generate the results that they actually want. And therefore, what you're always doing in that early stage, you're going back, but I got better results with my old habit. Yes, but you did. But if we continue with this new habit, over a period of time, we'll get twice as many results as the old habit. But we've got to break that habit. And I think that's the bit that we don't explain, how long it takes to break a habit and how long that new habit starts to kick in when it starts to generate real benefits to them. And I think as a leader, we've got to do that, because that will then start to create revenue generating behaviors. And I always think if you start to pick at the key habits, then it develops secondary habits. And it's those secondary habits that then start to support the primary habit. If you look at, say, business development, if you did the best business development at the same time every day, all of a sudden, all your teams start to become in sync. All of a sudden, you start to hear people listening to other people. And therefore, that habit of doing it, business development, all at the same time, Now we can start to develop our quality of business development, because you can start to see who's winning, who's losing, who's not, who's having good calls, who's saying the right word track, etc. And it starts to happen. So we've got to become a little bit more, I suppose, rigid at breaking habits, and understand that it takes a long time to do that. So last question then. So how do you balance structure and flexibility to ensure consistency without making processes feel rigid and restrictive?
So we are running out of time. I'm going to be really quick here. I think it's the art of a great business is to have the structure and the rigidity that we've talked about. So there is a platform there and people can form, but also empowering people. Once you've got them to work in the ways that, as we've talked about, that produce the consistency, is then to give them the freedom to express themselves above that platform. So you have the firm platform, but you give people, as it were, artistic license to express themselves. You don't want robots. You don't want everybody sounding the same. I guess the best example would be Apple. If you talk to somebody from Apple, you'll find that you are being guided through a process. There's no question it's a completely rigid process, but the person you're talking to is expressing their personalities as a human being. And you can see that every single person you speak to is different, but they're taking you through the process.
Yeah, I bang on about this a lot with my customers, is about that fixed and flexible. So exactly what you said there, Paul. As a leader, you have to define what is the fixed elements of your process, what are the non-negotiables, and then outside of that, encourage the team to come up with how they want to play around within that structure to keep it fun, to keep it energizing for themselves. One thing I will say is I have a lot of empathy with business owners who do this remotely. In the new kind of flexible working environment, it's increasingly difficult. So you have to find a way to bring those people together virtually and face to face when you can, so that they feel that that framework is applicable to everybody, because it just takes one person to go against the framework and the whole thing falls down. So you have to be consistent in showing that it's applied to everybody.
So I think that word applicable there is something I pull on. So I always think if you drew a big circle and said, right, these are our processes within inside our circle, okay, and it's the discipline of delivering that process. But if you allow people their own individuality to deliver that process, as long as that thinking is within inside that circle, then it works. What we tend to find is people try to push outside of that circle and challenge that circle. Now, sometimes that might expand the circle, but sometimes it breaks the circle, and that's the problem. So we've got to give them that rigidity, but we've got to give them that flexibility for their own personality. And that's how it works. If you look at how we've all answered these questions today, we've all approached them from different angles in different styles, etc. And therefore, we've been rigid in our process. We've had really good thoughts that are disciplined, and we've kept them inside a certain rigidity. But we've all done it in our own different styles. And I think that's the way you start to do. So your flex and flexibility becomes part of that. But I think having a disciplined process, disciplined thoughts creates disciplined people. And that starts to create results from there. So that's it for this week. Running slightly over as always. Okay, next week we've got a really interesting, and I do think next week is going to be a really interesting webinar. Is your recruitment culture a performance catalyst or a handbrake? And we've started to touch on that today. And I said, yesterday when I started to record our podcast, even the really big recruitment agencies are massively looking at their culture and seeing how their culture either becomes the catalyst or the handbrake to performance. So thanks so much, Martin. Thanks so much, Paul. Thank you much, everybody, for attending. I look forward to seeing you all next week, and start looking out for the podcast. They will be coming very, very soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.